Hi, it's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and today I'm going to be showing you how to wrap your cakes with edible images. And I believe this is one of the first times that I'm actually talking about edible imaging on my channel. Now, please forgive me for this terrible fondant covering that I'm doing. The reason it looks like this, I'm using an old dummy cake, and once you use your cakes over and over again, sometimes they get a little bit rough, but that's all right. We're gonna clean this one all up by adding this edible image on top. So the first thing I wanna talk about with edible imaging is you wanna make sure that you keep your edible image covered up. If you don't, it has a tendency to dry out really easily. In a separate video, I'm going to be talking about printing your own edible images at home. This particular one I actually purchased. Now, I've never been a huge fan of edible image printed cakes. However, I do think that this is a great option to offer your customers if they're unable to accommodate hand painting in their budget. There are also just some patterns out there that are highly difficult to replicate, so using an edible image is definitely the way to go. And I feel like when you add on buttercream or fondant details on top of that, it ends up looking really sharp and clean. So this is one of the ways in which you can adhere your edible image, and that's by steaming your fondant and then placing that edible image directly on. I'm showing you guys this particular method in case you don't want fingerprints on the top of your cake. Just place the cake board down, use a fondant smoother to get everything nice and flush to your cake. You don't want any bubbles with this. Now, if you really want zero seam at all with your edible imaging, then you will have to print on larger paper, but I'm not really caring about that too much, and you can also always cover up that seam with fondant detailing. Now, this is the riskier way of actually applying your edible image. If you're not as comfortable with doing it, highly suggest you do it with a little bit of shortening. This just gives you a little bit more leeway in terms of placing your edible image exactly where you want it. Whereas with the steam, it can get a little bit gucky and then you won't be able to pull it off, or your edible image will start tearing. I'm just going to finish up the details of this cake. I'm going to put a little bit of fondant in here, and I'm really trying to slow down certain portions of my videos because I know that some things go a little bit quickly. So in order to get this into the mold, you'll notice that I actually kind of punched the fondant into the mold. This just makes sure that everything is actually nice and smooth in there, and then I'm going to get all of those indents that I want. Make sure that you use a little tool like that to get rid of the excess. Don't use an X-Acto knife or you will cut into your mold, especially these ones that are quite soft. You want to make sure that you protect it. I will put everything that I'm using down in the description box below so you can go and check out those items for yourself. Now, to adhere this, I don't want to steam this edible image. You guys know, if you've watched any of my fondant videos, I love steaming my cakes to get fondant to adhere to fondant. But if you steam your edible image, it's just going to be a watery mess and things are going to start breaking apart and it's going to wreck your image. So since this is a dummy cake, I'm just using shortening. Of course, if you don't want to use shortening, you can use an edible glue, you can use royal icing, or you can use buttercream. If you didn't want to add any fondant detailing to the top edge, then prior to actually applying the edible image, you would have wanted to cut down that edge just a little bit so it fit perfectly. With any of my floral cakes, I love adding on this particular rose. If you guys want to see how I do this with a lollipop, go ahead and check out that video in the right-hand corner. This time around, all I'm doing is I'm taking the petals and I'm using that balling tool, getting them nice and thin to give it that realistic flair, and then I'm folding it in half and rolling it up. Now, when I roll it up, I do make sure that the petals kind of go a little bit higher as we go so that it looks more like a natural rose. And I'm just going to do this over and over to create a large flower. Now, of course, if you want to create a bigger flower but you don't want to spend all your time rolling that much fondant, you can always put a styrofoam ball or something else in the center. You can also go edible like I do with my lollipop rose hack. As I fix up the last few details with this cake, I want to talk a little bit more about the actual edible image. So when you're choosing your edible image pattern, you want to make sure that it's something that's going to look good on the sides of your cake. So for example, this is only a 6-inch cake. So the rose pattern, or the flower pattern, I should say, that was chosen was quite small. If I went really big with the flower pattern, then I wouldn't really get to see a whole lot of the flower. So that's one thing that you do want to think about when you're doing this. I actually find one of the toughest things about edible image printing is making sure that you have high resolution photos that you can actually use and will look good on a cake. And here is our little 6-inch display cake. And of course, you can do all of the exact same techniques using a real cake. Now, one thing I will say is that if you struggle with your cakes getting sweaty or the fondant sweating out, then make sure that you wait until that fondant is completely dry and then add on your image. If it's too sweaty, not just like a gentle steam, it will get kind of crinkly, or you can just wreck it completely. Now let's get into the pricing of this cake. So if this cake were a real 6-inch covered with that edible image, I would charge $150 for this cake, which is quite a difference from if I were to actually paint this by hand and create the exact same image. This cake comes together relatively quickly, but the bakery that I purchased this from charges $20 for that edible image print. So you do want to make sure that you incorporate that into the price. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!